Well, welcome back, everybody, to What Drives You. And I am here. My name is Carl Bauer. I'm one of the hosts, and I have a co-host, one of our regular co-hosts, Stan Windhorn, and a super special guest, creator, filmmaker, music promoter, and lifelong friend, adult friend we met later in life, and a car guy. So welcome, Fred Uhter.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Stan.
Good to have you, Fred. Hi, Carl.
So Fred is created some films. He's a documentary. I would say he's one of the most creative and frugal bootstrapping filmmakers there are living in Chicago. And we, like I said, started working together in 1993 at a little startup company. And then Fred went to a kind of a different path after that, stayed in automotive, still is in automotive, but has worked on projects mostly music related. The Jay Bennett product, if any of you remember from Wilco, one of the creative geniuses behind the Wilco band. He also has just almost out, and I've seen a bunch of the versions, Michael McDermott, a local Chicago legend, really interesting guy. And then he's working on a project with me, which we'll really touch on, which I owe a debt of gratitude that I will never be able to repay his patience and generosity with Too Much Too Soon, which is the Leon Smith and Jerry Sanders story. And then he's got two others. One that's really interesting. It's the most recent one. I've been to a couple of the filmings or tapings, which is Pieces of Peace. So Fred, why don't we start there? Because that's kind of, well, you got two projects going at the same time, but that's the one that I don't really know a lot about. And I think is very interesting from a standpoint of you're under kind of a timetable because these legends are sort of winding down on their life clocks a little bit.
Right. Piece of Peace was sort of the backup band for all the Chicago soul hits of the 70s. So they're the equivalent of like the Funk Brothers behind all the Motown bands, and and Stax. All the cities had a bunch of hits, but basically the background musicians were the ones who made the same sound over and over. So it's interesting that the Piece of Peace, which is essentially 7 guys. But the difference was, like, if you have a Motown was one label, but that was Detroit. That was the big label in Detroit. And Stax was the big label in Memphis. Well, in Chicago, there wasn't one big label. There was 30 labels. So they never really gave Chicago a name, sound, a name that they could identify. They call it Record Row. So what I was doing was I was making these documentaries. And the only reason I was really making documentaries instead of like fictional films was because I could do it on my own. I didn't have to get a crew and pay everybody. So I could like go see somebody, interview them, put the lights up, put the sound up, do all the interviewing and leave. And it was really easy to do. But I interviewed one gentleman named Jimmy Johnson. He was a blues player around 80 years old. And he gave me a great interview. And I'm sitting there with him. I'm thinking, I'm just going to make a documentary about all Chicago soul music. And I sat down with this guy, and all of a sudden I started thinking about it as I'm there. He's telling me he's 80 years old, 60 years of his life, 65 years of his life, he's been a musician. And I'm going to take his story and use 5 minutes of his story in a film. And I go, well, that's not really justified. And so then it sort of spun out of control. And I'm like 60 interviews in now, and I don't know what this is. But in the middle, I found this story of the Piece of Peace, the band I was telling you about. And they were basically, like I said, they were the band behind everybody. And they were getting all these rave reviews every time they played in Chicago. All the clubs, they'd sell them out. They were known for taking their clothes off on stage, black lights, all kinds of stuff. And then they got the opportunity to go to Asia and Woodshed. But before that, they recorded an album. And they were going to, like I said, they were getting they were getting called Sly and the Family Stone, the new Jackson 5, all this. And they went to Asia and got stuck on this horrible situation where the manager stole the money. It was during Vietnam. Martial law was coming in. All their instruments were stolen. Big drug issues over there. The drummer, a girl he was seeing, put voodoo on him. And it's in there too. So it's this crazy story, but it essentially just tore the band up. And they were supposed to be there 6 months. They got stuck there 2 years. And when they came back, they just didn't like each other anymore. And since then, one of the guys in the band went on to work with Quincy Jones and did Michael Jackson's albums and Justin Timberlake's albums, doing the arranging. So, it's a crazy story. strange part is there's no footage of these guys from the 70s because no one took footage of them. So it's trying to make that movie's at the editors now, and I just got to sort of look at a rough cut of it and see what that looks like and see where we're going to go.
Stan, it's interesting because, well, first of all, I wanted to comment, Stan, maybe that voodoo thing from the lady, maybe that's stuff that's going on with with some of your friends.
Yeah. Never mind. New subject. I would like to comment on something. Fred, I've seen, or at least I've watched a couple of different documentaries recently that sound similar in the fact that there's a few, when I say a few, like I just watched one, it was called The Wrecking Crew, I think, and it was about 20 session players that really are playing on a lot of the records. I think they were the 70s. There was another one that I watched recently that was the same kind of a thing, and it might have been the Stax record one, but it's just amazing to me how such a small group of people really were responsible for most of the music that we all know, even though it was labeled out with all these different bands and things like that. So I think your timing on this documentary sounds perfect. So how are you making up for the fact that there wasn't a lot of footage that was shot back then?
Well, what I was doing for a little while there was I'd interview these older musicians, and then I would like find a club, and they would let me have the gentleman who's 40 years older than that, and I'd get to film them. And then I shot some B-roll where I put some younger people in wigs and instruments and shot that. So that's what it looks like. I mean,
kind of reenactment kind of stuff.
Correct. I've done that before and it hasn't worked, and I had to throw it all out. But we'll see what this looks like. So.
Well, Stan, you brought up a great point, and that's where Fred's creativity, like problem solving, came into this whole deal. All kidding aside, which is just now he has to go from creative filmmaker, content builder to, oh crap, I gotta find these guys, I gotta find a venue, I gotta promote their show, I gotta babysit them, I gotta get them the red carpet treatment so they show up and perform. And again, there is this 40, 50-year gap of when they were to what they are now. And that was one of the shows I was at, which was a great show. But it was funny, and Fred and I have talked about this. Stan, I was watching in back. I was with Matt Muehlbach, our other partner, and Jerry and Leon came in later. But I was watching from the back row, and there was all this like stuff going on, only to find out later from Fred, there's all this drama about who's going to sing, what order they're going to sing, just all this craziness, because again, they're not one at the top of the game, but two, they're kind of older and set in their ways. We're like, I don't have to do that. So just kind of, you're a saint to try and pull that off, but I guess there's no better way, huh?
Yeah, and I mean the saddest part is that they're probably getting paid what they were paid in the 70s and 80s. That they're getting paid that same amount here, and it's it's embarrassing to offer them that amount. So
yeah. Well, it's always a challenge when you get a group of creative people. It's always a challenge to get them all to agree on things a lot of times. So I get it.
Right.
Yeah, and Stan, that's kind of where you guys have kind of crossed paths, in different cities, Austin and Chicago, which is Stan has done a lot of work around some local bands in Austin and videos and music videos. And so his cutting and splicing and voicing over and creativity has been really fun to watch. And it trickles into our channel here a little bit. So hopefully, Stan, Fred's going to be one of our kind of resident music experts on the channel. So what drives you in music? He's got a couple interviews lined up. So we're excited to see who that will be.
Very nice.
Now I was going to bring up kind of something about, I don't know if people would want to hear about it, but kind of our hair care routines. So I was going to talk a little bit about that, but I thought that might be just too short of a conversation for all of us. So let's move on to the next one, which is, Fred, again, in all seriousness, the kindness that you have shown through this Leon Smith project, Too Much Too Soon. We've talked about it on the podcast or on the video stories here on What Drives You, but And that's kind of one of the most watched episodes. That it's basically Stan was interviewing me about how did we do a documentary, and you're
Right.
sort of the driving force behind that. So tell me how that came about from your perspective, and what the journey over the last 2.5 years has been like with mental health.
Well, it was you and I getting together, and you're talking about we were going to work on a project with a donation card project, and then all of a sudden, somewhere along the way, you told me about Leon, and I go, "That's a documentary." And and I know you. You've always been an entrepreneur, and you're always looking for something to do. And then we start talking about it, and it's been trying. It's tough. It's really tough to work with someone who has some mental illness, and you and I being there in situations that just implode, and people not showing up. I think the toughest part of about a documentary, if the story isn't told or isn't finished, is where does the story go and when is it over? When do you decide it's over? And I think Carl, I know I told you that, like, I go like, well, when you're dealing with somebody, Leon, and we all love him, and you love him particularly because you've known him 30 something years, maybe. Is that
40.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. It's tough when you got to make you don't know if this person will be likable to the audience or not likable to the audience, and does he change? Because if you look at a fictional film, that character usually changes. And if the character doesn't change, what do you do? And why will somebody like this person all the way through? And these are all questions you and I dealt with. And it's tough. It's tough to find it until you look at it at the end and go, what do we have? So I don't think I answered your question. I think I answered my question, but right. So
Well, no, you touched on it. I mean, the journey has been interesting when you're trying to film. It's almost like, the hours and hours and hours of, and I'm not comparing Leon to a wild animal, but wildlife photographers literally will sit for days and days and days and days just to catch this tiny little nugget of never caught on camera before, the birth of a baby panda, right? This, that kind of stuff. And that's sort of what's like with Leon from the standpoint of, how many times have we set something up and he has just either delivered gold or delivered where we're like, what a waste of time. And so
hmm
that's part of the problem with mental health, a big part of it. So we're trying to build, and Stan's thrown in some really good ideas too on how do you craft a story around not only Leon's uh, micro problem, but in general in America, the mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety or bipolar, schizophrenia, an addiction, because all this plays into the story. And to your point, when do you end it? I mean, at a certain point, you got to go, okay,
that's it.
that's it. And all these people who have helped you, Matt, Jerry, me, my family, for giving me time away from them. And this dude can't do anything to help himself. So again, that's mental health. So
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough when you know how you want the story to end, and you almost orchestrate it, which is almost disingenuous sometimes because you're trying to create a happy ending, and then you go, this is not a happy ending this way. What can we look at this from another angle and say it's a happy ending this way? Tough to do because then you got to restructure everything you thought you were going to do with this. So
well, and you had again, you had a happy ending when he got drafted in the first round. Okay, you could have ended right there. You had a happy ending when he got out of jail and survived that. You got a happy ending when he got his apartment, got off the street. But again, there's all. I guess that's life, right? It's all these up and downs, failures and successes. So it's been interesting to watch.
what
Um,
Orson Welles said, what's the difference? Happy ending and a sad ending, where he ended, right? So
yeah. Hey, I've got a question for both of you, particularly for you, Fred. But I know that if I'm shooting something, and I'm just going to use an example since Carl brought it up. If I'm shooting a band, and but it really doesn't matter throughout my whole kind of career, you do a lot of takes, and I have learned over the years that invariably, almost 100% of the time, I end up using my last take. And I think what I've kind of learned is that I kind of get a sense of, okay, that I got what I was looking for on that one, which is why it's the last take. And then I
Mm.
can go on to doing something else. Do you relate to that? And do you kind of get that same feeling? And when you do a lot of takes like that, do you typically end up with the last one?
I know what you're saying. It's like it's and at some point you go like, I never got what I wanted, and then I'm gonna have to
Well,
go in
that's
the edit room.
frustrating. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go in the edit room and cut a bunch of stuff and make it work. But I know what you're saying. Like at some point you feel like you got it, right? So,
Yeah.
but then there's also the spontaneity that you see that the audience doesn't see it on that first take too, right? You go all these little things that you see, a minute thing that makes it great. But I don't know if
Mhm.
anybody else is paying attention on their when they're looking at their cell phone, going, I don't know, you know.
Yeah, that's another thing that I've always enjoyed, especially with video, sometimes with audio stuff too, but every now and then you just get lucky and you
Hmm.
get this really cool thing. And I don't know why this one is sticking in my brain, but I was doing a commercial for Medieval Times for a Halloween for their Halloween presentation. And the music kind of would go dump dump bump 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 bump, and I ended up we had an owl that was in the show, and on the bump bump, I got the owl turned its head and then its eyes focused. So it went perfectly with the bump bump. I didn't try to make that happen, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is every now and then you just get these gems. And to your point, Fred, maybe nobody else even really saw that little second of stuff and went, man, that's so cool. But it's rewarding when you're putting something like that together.
Yeah, I think Stan, and the other thing I'll say something about that is the idea that you see this something that's maybe even like a mistake, or and all of a
Yeah.
sudden it's like it's great, and then your mind starts going, "What else can I do with this idea?" And then that's what makes this fun, you know.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that we're all of a certain age or age group, and now we're really diving in. And you guys have been a super big encouragement with me on this, which is learning a whole new skill set, trade, right? A lot of what we do in entertainment and creation is right sales and marketing because we're trying to get a guest or this or that. But Stan, you've dove deep into this AI stuff. Fred, you're dabbling in a little bit and want to know more, but you dove deep into this filmmaking and creating on a budget of next to nothing, which is just amazing to me. What I'm going to ask you both um, is what drove you, pun intended, to take this creative outlet at this time in your life? Fred, why don't you go first?
Okay, well, I was doing this stuff in sort of high school and then early on, and then I had a tragic accident in the family, and I had to raise the kids by myself. And so I finally got to get back in it, and it's like, but I mean, at some point, I remember Anthony Burgess, the guy who wrote Clockwork Orange, and he said, and at some point, he thought he was going to, anybody in the car business, don't take this the wrong way. He had been writing books, but then all of a sudden, he thought he got a diagnosis that he was going to die. And so he said, in
Mhm.
order to support his family, he said he had to write like 7 books in 2 years, and he wrote them, and then he found out he was still going to live. But my point is, I was in the car business, great, right, made a good living and all that stuff. But I go like, at some point, I go like, I don't want to look at my tombstone and it says salesman on it, even though they never say that on your. But you see the point I'm making, right? I said I'd like to do some things that say I'm proud of some other things I'm doing in my life.
So was it the kids aging out, now you getting some time back? Or
Correct.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Correct.
Stan, how about you? What kicked you into
I don't know. I think I've always been drawn to the creative process, even as a kid. I mean, I was the kid who was doing plays in his garage or haunted houses in the basement or whatever. So I've always just really enjoyed the creative process, and working on things like video and stuff like that is just it's just another outlet for me. So I get lost in it at times. If once I get on to a creative project, I'm sure both of you can relate to, sometimes I can't even sleep at night because I'm thinking about what I want to do next or how I want to do something. But I, I don't know. I think it's always been in me just to kind of enjoy the creating.
And I'll add one more thing. And I think we're all very similar in this idea. It's like once we get an idea, it's like this is fun, and this is like we want to be here. We want to take this idea places, And I know you're like that, Carl, too. I mean, it's just like, okay, what can we do with this? Where can it go? This is exciting, and we just try to follow that path, right? So.
Yeah, I in my mind, we have so many friends, I know we all do, that they're just 9 to 5, paycheck to paycheck, just living their life. I feel like, and I've seen this a little bit with my mom and dad, they did amazing things, raising us and caring for us. But then they got to a certain point and they're just kind of like, yeah, we're just going to coast it out. And I feel like that's not happening with the three of us and some of the other people we've gotten to meet through these journeys. Stan brought me to a show, I don't know, a few months ago, right down the street from his house. We just stumbled on it, and one of the bands that he's recorded for was there. And I'm looking up at these guys, and they are older than me, I would guess, Stan, right? They're mid-50s, 60. I'm referring to Suede. And the energy that these dudes had was just, I'm like, we're at a little local small bar and they are just rocking it. And the vast majority of people in our age group, they're just not. They're just sitting back. And so thank you both for spurring me on to bigger and better things. Even if none of these things translate into anything, the joy and the challenge and the life that it's given me has been really cool. And you two are a big part of it. So thank you.
So Suede was playing down there? Suede, like Suede from London? That Suede?
No, it's a different Suede, spelled the same way, Suede, but they have been one of the top cover bands
Okay.
in the Austin area for a long time now. There's been some members, one in particular passed away. There's been a few changes, but the core of them, they still, if Suede's playing somewhere, they're gonna pack the house. And in fact, Carl and I want to have one particular guy by the name of Robert Wagner. He's just a consummate showman. If you ever want to videotape a guy in a band, he gives you lots of really good stuff because he's just got the showmanship to him. But kind of to your point on that, Carl, I see a band like Suede, and yeah, these guys are never going to get a big recording contract and go do a world tour and play for giant arenas or anything like that. But I watch people doing that kind of thing, going, what a blessing it is, because they obviously are doing something that they love. And listen, if they can make a couple of bucks doing something they love that much, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Another example, I went to a fairly new Italian restaurant recently here by my house, and there's a guy in there who basically, he doesn't look like Frank Sinatra, but he sounds a lot like Frank Sinatra, and he's just in there with his little music thing and his microphone, and I talked to him about it, and he's just like, "Oh, this is just so great." He's playing, doing Frank Sinatra for 15 people in the restaurant, but he's doing something that he loves. And I think that's certainly one of the definition of success that I would use, is if you're doing something that you're really passionate about, that's the payoff.
Yeah,
I think you
sure.
just said what the title of the show is, right? Right. What drives it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, truly.
Well, Fred, I know we did this on short notice, and I appreciate it, but let's jump into our kind of our wrap up questions here, which are, and I teed you up on them a little bit. So tell us about your first car.
Well, we didn't have a lot of money, so my mom and dad gave me a Maverick, and I didn't like it because they had a lot of rust on it. So then they gave me their other Maverick that didn't have the rust on it, which is really like, it's touching now that I think about it, because I got the better Maverick. So, and it's not
I
like
remember the Maverick. Yeah.
not like the Mavericks now, right? So
No. Okay. What was your favorite car in all the cars? Because again, you're in the car business, so you probably owned a ton of them. What was your favorite car?
I had a '65 Mustang when I was a kid, so that was it. I mean, you could pull up the carpet and you could see the ground, but it still was a '65 Mustang. So
Yeah.
Nice. And then what is your dream car?
I don't know. I like the Audis, man. I like the Audi sports cars. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, they're the A8 or the S8, I should say, is like a screaming fast car, all-wheel drive, and just complete luxury. To me, that's top of my list for sure.
Yeah, the way
All
they
right, and then
handle it is unbelievable. Yeah.
we try and wrap these shows up with just and we've talked a little bit. So again, the premise of this show was again supposed to be automotive, like all automotive. We were just going to interview people from our industry and all that. And then as COVID rolled through and I did some kind of test stuff, I'm like, you know what? This is way bigger than car stuff. This is about what drives you, what gets people off their hinders, like we're doing at our, you know, advancing age, right? Our later years in life here, fourth quarter maybe, we're getting off our butts. So, what would you tell a young Fred Uhter, 18-year-old Fred Uhter, or what would you tell someone just starting out in life? What would be your words of wisdom?
I'd say it sounds like a Nike commercial, but just do it. If I think of all the things we've done, you know, and I always think if I knew how much it'd take 10 years to make these documentary films, I never would have done them, you know, and I would never put this money in when I could buy a really nice $80,000 car after I put all this money in. But it's just like you just do it and you figure it out, and that's it. I mean, it's fun when you do it, you know, but I wish I would have done a little more research. No, I'm glad I didn't do the research, I should say.
Yeah.
So,
Well, but you've met some interesting people, and I think
yeah.
Stan, you had a similar. Wasn't yours just start? Wasn't that your words of wisdom?
Yeah, as a perpetual procrastinator, what mine was the most important part of any achievement is to begin. So it's very similar to yours, Fred. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing you kind of say, Fred, is you got to just enjoy the process. You got to get your reward in the process, not necessarily at the finish line all the time. Um, but
Yeah, is the goal? I mean, is the goal to make a lot of money, or is the goal to do something? Do you know what I mean? Like, of course, we like the money, but it's sort of
sure.
what what do you want to spend your time doing, right?
Yeah. Well, for those of you who had joined our show weekly or as often as we post, our goal on this channel is always to educate, encourage, or entertain. These guys are super encouraging to me because they make me, again, the overarching theme of the channel is uh, telling stories to help people be better and do better. And so I think you guys are an inspiration to me in your dedication to, getting stories out there that probably wouldn't be told otherwise. Stay in your local bands that you're, helping out, and Fred, these musicians who their story may have never gotten out there. So if you want to, I know Jay Bennett, you can get online the Jay Bennett story, very, very touching. I will warn you, it's not a happy ending, but I mean, just a amazing, tortured, creative genius was Jay Bennett. Michael McDermott, when that comes out, this guy has been through some stuff too, but he's helping others and he's giving back. And I can't wait to see Pieces of Peace, because those stories would have never gotten told without you. So thanks, Fred, for digging in and funding
Thank you.
all these things and helping on all these projects.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll see you soon. And thanks again for joining. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.